10 silver says he won't even last the hour, someone muttered, and the crowd laughed like it was a game instead of a life as Elena Whitmore tightened her grip around the single coin hidden in her palm. The last thing she owned in a world that had already taken everything else. The iron market stretched before her in a haze of dust and murmurs, rows of chained figures kneeling beneath the harsh afternoon sun. The scent of sweat and rust thick in the air, and she told herself she shouldn't be. Here, that one coin couldn't change anything. Not for her, not for anyone. But then she saw him, not because he was the loudest or the strongest, but because he was the only one who didn't look down, even on his knees, even with iron wrapped around his wrists. He held himself like the ground beneath him belonged to him, like the world had made a mistake putting him there. And something in Elena's chest tightened in a way she didn't understand. That one. The traitor scoffed when she stepped closer, his voice dripping with disbelief as he glanced at her worn clothes and thin frame. Girl, you don't want that one. He doesn't beg, doesn't speak, barely eats, broken goods. Broken. The word echoed in her mind as she looked at the man again. His dark hair falling over his face, his shoulders still, his silence louder than the jeers around him. And for a moment she hesitated, the coin pressing into her skin. This was her last chance to buy bread, to survive another day, and yet the thought of walking away felt heavier than hunger. I'll take him. Her voice came out softer than she intended, but it cut through the noise all the same. The laughter that followed was immediate, sharp, like she had just made the worst decision anyone had ever seen. You're serious? The traitor leaned forward, eyes narrowing. That's your last coin. Girl, you spend it here. You walk out with nothing. Elena swallowed, her throat dry. But she didn't look away. I know, she said, placing the coin into his hand before she could change her mind, before fear could catch up to her. The metal left her palm, and with it went everything she had left. The traitor shrugged and snapped his fingers, keys jangling. As he unlocked the chain attached to the man's wrists. He's yours then, though I doubt he'll last long. The crowd began to disperse, already bored, already moving on to the next spectacle. But Elena didn't move, not until the chain dropped to the ground with a dull clang. The man remained still for a second longer, and then, slowly, he lifted his head, his eyes finding hers with a sharpness that made her breath catch. Not dull, not broken, but something else entirely, something controlled, something watching. And for the first time since she stepped into the market, the noise around her seemed to fade. You shouldn't have done that. His voice was low, steady, nothing like she expected, and Elena felt a chill run through her despite the heat. She opened her mouth, unsure what to say, unsure why her heart was suddenly beating too fast. But before she could speak, the air shifted, subtle at first, like the moment before a storm breaks. And somewhere in the distance, someone stopped, laughing. The shift in the air was subtle but undeniable, like the moment before thunder rolls across an open sky. And Elena felt it first in her chest, a tightening she could not explain as she instinctively took a half-step back, her fingers brushing against the rough fabric of her sleeve as if grounding herself. The man in front of her did not move much, not at first, but something about him had changed, not in posture but in presence, as though the space around him had begun to bend quietly, invisibly. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, and for a heartbeat he did not answer. His gaze remained fixed on her, steady and unreadable, as if weighing something far greater than her question. Then he exhaled slowly, the faintest sound, and turned his head just slightly, scanning the market with a calm that did not belong to someone who had just been bought. You traded your last coin, he said finally, his tone measured, almost thoughtful, for something you do not understand. Elena swallowed, her throat dry. She wanted to say that she understood enough, that she had seen something in him that mattered, but the words felt small compared to the weight of his voice around them. The market had not returned to normal. The laughter had quieted, conversations had softened into murmurs, and even the trader who had taken her coin was now watching from a distance, his earlier confidence replaced by something uncertain. Elena noticed it all in fragments. The way people avoided stepping too close, the way the guards shifted their weight as if suddenly unsure of their ground. If you are in danger, she began, forcing steadiness into her voice, then I will take responsibility. You are under my protection now. The words sounded fragile even to her own ears, and yet she meant them. She had made a choice, and she would not abandon it. For the first time, something flickered in his expression, not surprise exactly, but something quieter, something almost like recognition. He studied her for a long moment, and Elena felt seen in a way that made her heart race, not with fear, but with something deeper, something she could not name. Protection, he repeated softly, as if testing the word. Then a faint breath of something that might have been amusement touched his voice. You think you can protect me? Elena's cheeks warmed, not with embarrassment, but with stubborn resolve. I chose you, she said, lifting her chin just slightly. So yes, I will try. Silence followed, not empty but full, as if the world itself had paused to listen. Then, without warning, a low vibration seemed to hum through the ground beneath her feet, so faint she might have imagined it, except she saw the reaction ripple outward. A guard near the entrance straightened abruptly, his hand hovering near his side, as if unsure what to do. Another man dropped his gaze entirely, stepping back without realizing it. Elena's breath caught as the man in front of her slowly rose to his feet. The movement was unhurried, controlled, but it carried a weight that pressed against the air itself. She had expected weakness, expected him to stumble after being chained for so long. But he did not falter. He stood tall, taller than she had realized, and suddenly the distance between them felt smaller, the world quieter. His eyes never left hers as he took a single step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence without him touching her. And in that moment, Elena understood one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever she had bought with her last coin, it was not broken, not even close. And somewhere behind them, someone whispered a single word that spread through the crowd like a breath carried on wind, not loud, not shouted, but unmistakable. Alpha. The word moved through the market like a quiet current, not shouted, not confirmed, but felt. And Elena saw it in the way shoulders stiffened and voices dropped, in the way no one dared step closer even though nothing visible had changed. The man standing in front of her did not react to it, not outwardly, but the air around him seemed to grow heavier, more certain, as if the world itself had recognized something it could not deny. Elena's pulse quickened, her thoughts catching up to the moment. Too slowly. Alpha. The word echoed in her mind. Not just a rank, but something deeper, something older, and yet she forced herself to stay where she was, even as instinct whispered that she should step back, create distance, disappear like everyone else was trying to do. But she did not move, because she had chosen him, and leaving now would mean that choice had been a mistake, and she did not believe that. Not anymore. Not after looking into his eyes. You hear them, she said quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. They think they know what you are. His gaze did not waver, and for a moment she thought he might ignore her question entirely. But then he tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words rather than dismissing them. They remember what power feels like, he said, his tone calm, almost detached. Even when they cannot explain it. Elena drew in a slow breath, trying to steady the way her chest rose and fell. And do I need to be afraid of that power? The question slipped out before she could stop it, honest and unguarded. And for the first time, something in his expression shifted in a way she could read. Not anger, not pride, but something quieter, something almost careful. That depends, he replied, his voice lowering just enough that she felt it more than heard it. On whether you regret your choice. The world seemed to narrow around them, the distant noise fading into something indistinct as Elena held his gaze, her fingers curling slightly at her sides. She thought of the empty weight of her pocket, the coin she had given away, the hunger that would come later, the uncertainty of tomorrow, and yet none of it felt as sharp as the clarity of this moment. I do not, she said, the words firm now, rooted in something deeper than fear, and, for a brief second, the tension in the air shifted again, not easing, but changing direction, like a storm turning rather than breaking. Behind them, the traitor finally stepped forward, his earlier hesitation replaced by forced confidence. All right, that is enough, he said, his voice louder than necessary as if trying to reclaim control of the situation. Transaction is done. Take your purchase and leave, both of you. Elena glanced back at him, then at the guards who now stood a few feet farther away than before. none of them meeting the man's eyes, none of them stepping in, and she realized something that made her heart skip. No one here was in control anymore. Not really. The rules that governed this place had quietly shifted without anyone announcing it. She turned back to the man she had bought, unsure what to do next, unsure where to go. "Can you walk?" she asked, the question simple, practical, something to anchor herself to reality. He looked down briefly, as if acknowledging the question rather than needing to consider it, then back at her. "I can," he said, and there was something in the way he spoke that made it clear he had always been able to, that whatever had held him here had not been weakness. Elena nodded slowly, absorbing that, adjusting to it. Then she took a small step to the side, giving him space, not as a master would, but as someone offering a path. "Then come with me," she said, her voice quiet but certain, and for a moment, just a moment, he did not move, as if the choice was not whether he could follow, but whether he would. Then, with a calm that felt deliberate, he stepped forward, falling into place beside her, not behind, not ahead, but beside. And as they began to walk away from the market, Elena felt the weight of every eye on them, felt the silence stretch in their wake, and though no one stopped them, no one spoke, she knew without needing to look back that something had changed the moment he chose to follow her, something that would not be undone. They stepped out of the market and into a street that felt strangely wider than before, as if the world itself had pulled back to make room for them. Elena could still feel the weight of unseen eyes on her back, even though no one followed. Her footsteps were soft against the worn wooden planks of the walkway, each step measured as she tried to steady the rhythm of her breathing. Beside her, he walked in silence, his presence calm but impossible to ignore, not pressing, not threatening, yet undeniably there, like a quiet force that did not need to announce itself. Elena kept her gaze forward at first, focusing on the narrow road ahead, the faded storefronts, the distant sound of a carriage rolling somewhere beyond the next corner, anything that felt normal, anything that reminded her she was still in the same world she had woken up in that morning. But it did not feel the same, not anymore. "You have not told me your name," she said after a moment, her voice breaking the silence. Between them, it sounded smaller than she intended, but she did not take it back. He did not answer immediately, and for a brief second she wondered if he would ignore the question entirely. But then he glanced at her, not sharply, not dismissively, but with a quiet awareness that made her feel as though he had been observing her all along. "Names carry weight," he said, his tone even, especially when given too freely. Elena frowned slightly, not in frustration, but in thought. "Then I will start," she said, lifting her chin just a little. "My name is Elena Whitmore." The words felt grounding as she spoke them, a reminder of who she was before everything shifted, before the market, before him. He studied her again, something unreadable passing through his gaze. And then, after a pause that felt intentional, he spoke. "Lucas," he said, the name simple, but the way he said it made it feel like it was only part of the truth. Elena noticed that, but she did not press further. Not yet. They turned down a quieter street, the noise of the market fading behind them, replaced by the softer sounds of daily life. A door closing somewhere, the faint clatter of dishes, the distant murmur of voices, normal things, ordinary things, and yet none of it touched the space around them. Elena's hand brushed lightly against her side, instinctively checking the place where her coin had once been. The absence was still there, but it did not feel like loss. Not anymore. It felt like a turning point she could not undo even if she wanted to. "You can stay with me," she said after a moment, the words coming out before she had fully thought them through. But once spoken, they felt right. "It is not much, just a small room above a bakery, but it is safe." She hesitated slightly, then added, "Safer than the market." Lucas glanced ahead, then back at her, his expression unchanged. But there was a subtle shift in the way he listened, as if her offer mattered more than he would admit. "Safe is a relative word," he replied quietly, "but I will accept your offer." Elena let out a breath she had not realized she was holding, relief flickering through her chest. Though she did not fully understand why it mattered that he agreed, they continued walking, the distance between them remaining the same, not too close, not too far. And as they reached the narrow staircase that led up to her room, Elena paused, placing her hand on the worn railing, the wood smooth from years of use. She turned slightly toward him. "There is one thing I need to understand," she said, her voice quieter now, more careful. "Why did they call you that?" She did not say the word, but she did not need to. It hung between them all the same. Lucas did not answer right away, his gaze drifting past her for a moment, as if considering something far beyond the small street they stood on. Then he looked back at her, and for the first time since she met him, there was something unmistakable in his eyes, not hidden, not restrained, but clear, steady, and powerful in a way that made her breath catch. "Again, because," he said softly, "they remember what I am, even when they cannot see it." And though his voice remained calm, the air around them seemed to still once more, as if the truth itself had weight. The staircase creaked softly beneath Elena's weight as she climbed, each step familiar and grounding in a way she suddenly needed. The scent of fresh bread lingering faintly in the air from the bakery below, warm and comforting, a quiet contrast to the strange stillness that seemed to follow them. She pushed open the narrow door at the top and stepped inside. The room small but tidy, a single window letting in the late afternoon light, a modest bed against the wall, a wooden table with two mismatched chairs, everything simple, everything hers. She turned back toward Lucas, watching as he paused at the threshold, not hesitant, but observant, as if taking in every detail before choosing to enter. Then he stepped inside, and the space seemed to shift again, not physically, but in presence, as though the room had become aware of him. Elena closed the door gently behind them, the soft click echoing louder than it should have. "It is not much," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly aware of how small the room must seem to him. "But it is clean." Lucas's gaze moved across the space, lingering for a moment on the window where sunlight spilled across the floor, then on the table, then back to her. "It is enough," he said simply, and something in his tone made her believe he meant it. Elena nodded, then moved toward the table, her hands finding small tasks without thinking, straightening a cloth, adjusting a cup, anything to steady the quiet tension building in her chest. "You can sit," she offered, gesturing toward the chair, "or rest if you need to." Lucas remained standing for a moment longer, then slowly lowered himself into the chair, his movements controlled, deliberate, not the actions of someone recovering from weakness, but someone choosing restraint. Elena noticed that too, and it made her pause, watching him more closely now, seeing the details she had missed before, the steadiness in his posture, the quiet strength in the way he held himself, the absence of anything truly broken. And yet he had allowed himself to be placed in chains, allowed himself to be sold. The thought lingered in her mind, unanswered. She stepped closer to the small shelf near the wall and poured a glass of water from a simple pitcher, the liquid catching the light as it filled the cup. She carried it over and placed it gently on the table in front of him. "You should drink," she said, her voice softer now. Lucas looked at the glass, then at her, and for a brief second, something unreadable passed through his eyes. Not suspicion, not gratitude, but something deeper, as if the gesture meant more than it should. He reached for the glass and took a slow sip, his gaze never fully leaving her. Elena felt that again, that strange awareness of being seen, not judged, not measured, but understood in a way she had never experienced before. It made her chest tighten and her thoughts scatter. She turned slightly, placing her hands on the edge of the table to steady herself. "You said names carry weight," she began, her voice careful, "and that you should not give them freely. So why tell me yours?" Lucas set the glass down with a quiet sound, his fingers resting lightly against its surface. "Because you gave something first," he said, his tone even, "not just a coin." Elena blinked, the words settling over her slowly. She had not thought of it that way, not consciously, but hearing it spoken made something shift inside her, something warm and uncertain. "I only did what felt right," she said after a moment, her voice quieter now, almost reflective. Lucas leaned back slightly in the chair, his gaze steady. "That is rarely a small thing," he replied, and for a brief second, the room fell into silence again. But it was not empty. It was full of something unspoken, something building. Elena felt it in the way her heartbeat had not quite returned to normal, in the way the air seemed to hold its breath around them. And then, Without warning, a faint flicker of light passed across the window, not from the sun, but something softer, cooler, and Elena turned instinctively, her breath catching as she noticed the sky beginning to shift. The early glow of evening settling in, pale and silver, and for reasons she could not explain, the moment felt important, as if something unseen had begun to awaken alongside the fading light. The light outside the window softened into silver as the sun slipped lower, casting long shadows across the small room, and Elena found herself watching it longer than necessary, as if something in that quiet shift of day to evening mirrored the strange turning inside her chest. She had always loved this hour, the calm between noise and night, but tonight it felt different, heavier, like the air itself was waiting. She became aware of him again without needing to turn, the steady presence behind her, unmoving yet impossible to ignore. "You feel it too," Lucas said, not a question, his voice low but clear in the stillness. Elena glanced back at him, her brows drawing together slightly. "Feel what?" she asked, though part of her already knew what he meant. The way her skin seemed more sensitive, the way her heartbeat had not quite settled since they entered the room. Lucas's gaze shifted toward the window, his eyes catching the faint silver glow. "The change," he said. "It always comes before something reveals itself." Elena followed his gaze, her breath catching just slightly as she noticed how the light seemed to shimmer, not unnaturally, but with a clarity that felt almost too sharp, as if the world had been quietly sharpening its edges. She wrapped her arms loosely around herself, not from cold, but from the unfamiliar awareness settling into her senses. "I do not understand," she admitted, her voice softer now. Lucas rose from the chair slowly, the movement smooth and controlled, and as he stood, the space around him seemed to shift again, not in a way she could see, but in a way she felt, like a quiet pressure that settled deeper into the room. He stepped closer to the window, standing just beside her, not touching, but near enough that she could feel the warmth of him, steady and grounding. "You will," he said, his tone calm, certain. Elena swallowed, her fingers tightening slightly against her sleeves. "You speak as if you know what is going to happen," she said, turning her head to look at him fully now. Lucas met her gaze without hesitation, his expression unchanged, but there was something in his eyes that had grown clearer, less restrained. "I know enough," he replied, "and I know that you have already stepped into something you cannot step out of." The words settled over her slowly, not frightening, but undeniable. Elena's breath left her in a quiet exhale as she looked back toward the window, the silver light now stronger, brushing across the floor like a soft tide. "Because I chose you," she said, more to herself than to him. Lucas's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer before he spoke again. "Because you chose without fear," he corrected gently. "And that changes things." Elena felt that again, that quiet shift inside her, like a door opening somewhere she could not see. She had not thought of her choice as anything more than instinct, but hearing it spoken like that made it feel larger, more significant. The room fell silent once more, but this time the silence carried something else with it, a sense of anticipation that made her pulse quicken. Outside, the first stars had begun to appear, faint against the deepening sky, and the silver light grew softer, more defined. Elena drew in a slow breath, steadying herself. "Then tell me one thing," she said, her voice steady despite the tension building in her chest. Lucas turned slightly toward her, waiting. "What exactly did I bring into my home?" The question hung between them, simple but heavy, and for a moment, Lucas did not answer, his gaze drifting to the window again, as if considering how much to reveal. Then, slowly, he looked back at her, and the air seemed to still once more. "Not what?" he said quietly. "Who?" Elena's breath caught, and before she could speak again, a faint warmth spread through the room, subtle but unmistakable, as if something unseen had responded to his words, something awakening just beneath the surface of everything she thought she understood. The warmth did not fade. It deepened, spreading through the small room like a quiet pulse that neither of them acknowledged out loud, yet neither could ignore. Elena felt it first along her arms, a soft sensation like sunlight that did not come from the window. Her breath slowed as if guided by something unseen, and for a moment she simply stood there, caught between curiosity and something far more instinctive, something older than thought. Lucas did not move away, his presence steady beside her, but there was a subtle shift in him as well, not in posture, but in awareness, as though he too felt the same invisible current moving through the space between them. "This is not normal," Elena said softly, her voice barely more than a breath. Lucas's gaze remained on her, unblinking, focused. "No," he replied. "It is not." The honesty in his tone did not alarm her, it grounded her, and somehow that made the moment feel even more real. Elena's fingers curled slightly against her sleeves, the sensation building now, not overwhelming, but persistent, like a quiet call she could not yet understand. "Then what is it?" she asked, her eyes searching his. Lucas held her gaze for a long moment, as if measuring not her question, but her readiness to hear the answer. "Recognition," he said finally, the words simple, but heavy with meaning. Elena frowned slightly, her mind trying to catch up. "Recognition of what?" she pressed. Lucas took a slow step closer, closing the small distance between them, not abruptly, not forcefully, but with a calm certainty that made her heart skip. "Of what was already decided," he said, his voice lower now, steady and unwavering. Elena felt the air shift again, not around them, but within her, like something aligning into place, something she had not known was missing until now. Her breath caught as she realized she was not afraid, not even a little, despite everything she did not understand. Instead, there was a strange sense of clarity, like standing at the edge of something vast and knowing, without explanation, that she belonged there. "I do not remember deciding anything," she said quietly, her voice softer now, almost reflective. Lucas's expression did not change, but his eyes held something deeper, something certain. "Some things are decided long before we are aware of them," he replied. Elena's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with a growing awareness she could not ignore. She glanced briefly at the window, the silver light now brighter, more defined, casting a gentle glow across the floor, and for a moment it felt as if the world outside had grown quieter, as if everything had narrowed to this room. This moment, she turned back to him, her voice steadier now. "And what does that mean for me?" Lucas studied her carefully, not as if searching for weakness, but as if acknowledging something rare, something important. "It means," he said slowly, "that your choice was never as small as you believed." Elena felt that again, that quiet shift inside her chest, like a truth settling into place. She thought of the coin, the market, the laughter, and how distant it all felt now, as if it belonged to a different version of herself. "And for you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas did not hesitate this time. "It means I am no longer bound to silence," he said, and as the words left him, the air seemed to still completely, not heavy, not tense, but absolute, as if something had just been spoken that could not be undone. Elena's breath caught, the meaning of his words not fully clear, but deeply felt, and in that quiet, suspended moment, she understood one thing with certainty. Whatever had begun when she placed that coin in the trader's hand had not ended there. It had only just begun. The silence that followed his words did not feel empty. It felt complete, as if something unseen had settled into place between them. And Elena stood there, her breath slow and steady, her thoughts no longer racing but sharpening, aligning with a clarity she had never known before. The room around her felt smaller now, not confining, but focused, like everything unnecessary had quietly fallen away, leaving only what mattered. She became aware of her own heartbeat again, not frantic, not uncertain, but deliberate, each beat echoing with a quiet sense of purpose that she could not explain. "No longer bound," she repeated softly, her voice thoughtful rather than questioning. Lucas inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her words without interrupting them. Elena's gaze drifted for a moment, not away from him, but inward, tracing the path that had led her here, the coin in her hand, the moment she chose him without knowing why, the way the world had shifted the instant he looked at her, and now this stillness that felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. She looked back at him, her expression steadier now. "Then you were never truly what they thought," she said, and it was not a question. Lucas's eyes held hers, and for the first time, there was no distance in them at all. No restraint, only quiet certainty. "No," he said simply, Elena felt a small breath leave her, not in surprise, but in recognition, as if a truth she had already sensed had finally been spoken aloud. She stepped slightly closer without thinking, drawn not by fear or curiosity, but by something that felt natural, inevitable, and as she did, the faint warmth in the room deepened once more, not overwhelming, but undeniable, like a quiet confirmation of something already decided. Then, why let it happen? She asked, her voice softer now. More personal. Lucas did not look away, his gaze steady, unwavering. Because it led me here, he answered, and there was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt, only certainty. Elena's breath caught at that, not because of the words themselves, but because of the way he said them, as if there had never been another outcome, as if every step had been part of a path neither of them had fully seen until now. She felt that again, that quiet alignment inside her, stronger now, clearer, like a thread pulling two separate moments into one. You speak as if this was meant, she said, barely above a whisper. Lucas's expression did not change, but something in his presence shifted, becoming more defined, more real. It was, he said, and as the words settled into the air, the silver light from the window seemed to brighten just slightly, casting a soft glow across the room that felt almost deliberate. Elena's heart beat once, firm and steady, and in that moment, she understood something she had not before, not in words, but in feeling, that her choice had not been random, that the instinct she had followed had not been blind, it had been guided. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing as the last of her uncertainty faded. Then what happens now? She asked, her voice calm, no longer searching. Lucas studied her for a moment, as if confirming something only he could see. Then he took a small step closer, closing the final distance between them, not touching, but near enough that the space between them felt charged with quiet energy. Now, he said, his voice low and certain, everything begins to reveal itself. Elena held his gaze, unflinching, and for the first time since this all began, she did not feel like she was reacting to something unknown. She felt like she was standing exactly where she was meant to be, and as the last light of evening settled fully into silver, the world outside seemed to fade just slightly, as if making room for whatever would come next. The room held its breath as his words settled, not as a command, not as a warning, but as a quiet truth that neither of them could ignore. Elena stood there, close enough to feel the steady warmth of him, close enough to realize that the space between them was no longer distance but connection, something unseen yet undeniable. Her heartbeat slowed, not from calm, but from certainty, a strange and steady certainty that replaced every doubt she had carried into that market. She did not look away. Not this time, because there was nothing in his gaze that asked her to, only something that invited her to understand, and for the first time, she felt ready to try. Then tell me, she said softly, her voice steady, grounded in something deeper than fear. Who are you, really? The question did not break the moment. It completed it. Lucas did not answer immediately, but this time the silence was not hesitation. It was intention. He lifted his hand slowly, not reaching for her, not touching, but holding it just within the space between them, as if acknowledging something that already existed there. I am the one they forgot how to recognize, he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that did not need explanation. Elena felt the words more than she heard them, felt them settle into the same place inside her where everything else had begun to align. She glanced briefly at his hand, then back to his eyes, and though he had not touched her, she could feel something, a faint warmth, a subtle pull, like the first moment of sunlight after a long night. And me? She asked, her voice softer now, not uncertain, but searching for the shape of what she had become in all of this. Lucas's gaze softened, not in weakness, but in recognition. You are the one who chose, he said, and there was something final in the way he spoke it, something that made the words feel like more than an answer. Elena drew in a slow breath, her chest rising and falling as the meaning settled into her. She thought of the moment her fingers had released that coin, the way everything had shifted without her understanding why, and now she did, not in logic, but in truth. She had chosen, and that choice had answered something far greater than circumstance. She let the breath out slowly, her shoulders easing as the last traces of uncertainty disappeared. Then I will keep choosing, she said, the words quiet but unwavering. Lucas's eyes held hers, and for a brief moment, something deeper passed between them, something unspoken but clear, and the faint warmth in the room responded again, stronger now, like a quiet affirmation. Outside, the night had fully settled, the silver light from the windows soft and steady, casting a calm glow over everything it touched. Elena felt it too, not as something separate, but as something connected to the moment, to him, to the path she had stepped onto without knowing where it would lead. And yet she no longer needed to know. She only needed to stand where she was. She glanced once more at the small room around her, the simple space that had been her entire world just hours ago, and realized it no longer felt small. It felt like the beginning of something larger than she had ever imagined. She looked back at Lucas, her gaze steady, and in that quiet, silver-lit moment, there was no longer a question of what would come next, only the certainty that whatever it was, they would face it together, and somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the quiet streets and sleeping city, something unseen seemed to stir in response, as if the world itself had taken notice of the choice that had been made.